Hello and welcome to the Nothing Is Wrong with You book podcast. We're thrilled to have you here with us today. As always, as we start the podcast, we're talking about what we're currently reading. And just so you know, we always put the links to the books we're reading in the show notes, so you can always go there if you want to check them out. So today I'm going to start with Colleen. What are you reading right now?
All right, I have three things here. This morning I finished Little Rot by Emezi. Did you like it?
I loved the one that came before that. What was it called?
The
Sorry,
second
let's
one?
talk. What was it? The
I was gonna make a gesture.
the one about the art gallery person. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, I know what book
You
you're talking about.
did you? How was Little Rot? Sorry, I'm totally interrupting because
I have to review it for Worldlit today, which is why I have it. But I feel like I'm maybe kind of over Emezi's like sexy books. I don't know.
I have it on my shelf and I haven't read Little Rot yet. Okay.
It's okay. It's
Okay.
not my favorite. I think
Okay.
Water's probably my favorite, and then everything not Freshwater.
Yeah.
So then when I finished that, I began
Okay.
Anne Michael's Held that I have from the
Yay.
library. This would be a terrible audiobook. I was thinking that as I was reading it.
I did listen to it, by the way.
Did you like? And you didn't like it as much as Athena.
Yeah.
And that might. I was reading. I'm like, oh, this would be a. Anyway. And then we don't talk about poetry very much, so I thought I'd bring some poetry to the table. This is called "The Moon That Turns You Back" by Hala Alian, and it's just like a,
I love the cover.
Little, yeah, and it's kind of moon phasey, and she's a professor at NYU, and so I like accessible poetry. Poetry doesn't need to be inaccessible and inscrutable. So reminder that poetry matters as well. I was thinking about that. So those are the three that I'm in, out, or around. How about you, Athena? What's on deck? What's currently on your shelf?
So I'm reading This Is a Love Story by Jessica Soffer. And I love it. It's really beautiful. What's that?
Is it fiction?
Yes, this is a fiction book. So this is a fiction book, and it's a love story of a marriage and of Central Park, and it's kind of all based around Central Park. And there's all these I don't know. It's just beautiful. It's like it talks about like the cycles of the city within it as well, and I'm loving it so far. I'm not that far in, but
is
it's
it a
really...
read with Jenna book? What's the...
Yes.
Oh, she does good. She picks well.
Yeah. I know. Do you notice that? Like, there's been right? There's been a few that I'm like, wow.
Reese and Jenna do not lead us.
Yes.
I'm not sad about any of that. Yeah.
Right? And then the other one is on the calculation of volume, and it's number 1. So I picked this up from okay, I was following Third Place Books, which is a bookstore in Seattle, and they said you got to read this book. And now there's going to be I guess there's already volume 2 and maybe 3. But then I saw it's on the long list for the International Booker Prize that just came out.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so this is it's kind of a Groundhog Day kind of thing, but she steps off the train of time in her world on the 18th of November, and it just repeats itself endlessly.
No. That feels like Rebecca's dream book and my worst nightmare.
Yeah, but
I'm slinking down like, oh god.
And I'm like going, ooh.
Rebecca's like, this is gonna be the best book I've ever read. I'm like, no.
I don't know. I think it's in these short little chunks, and I don't know. I'm liking it so far. I think it's cool, and they're all numbered. Like, what day of this day is it? Like 204, 207. Like,
it sounds a lot like Orbit.
But it's the same day and repeat.
Right. It's like the same day over and over again.
Right? I don't know. It just sounds.
So I'll let you know. I just started that.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thanks for taking one for the team, because I'm not reading that.
I love you, Colleen. So what about you, Rebecca? What are you reading?
Athena's our like Booker reader. She reads all the Booker stuff and then tells us which ones we should pick up.
As we're recording this, and I looked at it, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna let Athena take care of this.
At least wait till I get to the short list.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah, maybe I'll go down the short list path a little bit, but Athena's our resident Booker reader. Book. The Booker book.
Yeah, so I just finished recently The Axeman's Carnival by Catherine Chidgey, maybe? I don't know, I'll have to look it up. She also wrote Pet, which I read last year, which was really good. She's a New Zealand author, so this is, but you can get it here. This is available in the US. This is a story from the point of view of a magpie.
Oh, that's like your bread and butter, baby.
I didn't think I would actually like it. Like, I really was like, when I first heard about it, and this is going to sound crazy, but Sam Neill, I follow him on Instagram. He was like, this was really good. You should pick it up. And I think I already had it, but I just hadn't read it yet. Like, because this is what I do. I buy New Zealand books that are getting like awards or whatever, and then I don't always get to them right away. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna finally pick this one up. It was fascinating. It was really good.
That looks long.
It was pretty long.
Ugh.
Is
it too long?
No, I liked it. No, I wouldn't think so.
Colleen. So great.
I enjoyed it.
I got stuff to read. I don't know. I get grumpy when books are too long. But it sounds really cool. I think I would like that.
Yeah.
So
like that, Rebecca, should I read it?
I think you might like it. I don't know. So I don't. So a little bit more about it. So it's from the point of view of a magpie, and the magpie actually can start like he falls on the nest. This woman picks him up and brings him in, like kind of like takes care of him, and then tries to put him back out into nature, and he comes back, right? And so then he becomes part of their family. And in this, he's actually learned to like repeat words, like so. Instead of, he can still speak magpie, I guess if you want to call it, because he talks to his family out in the world. But he becomes famous because he is he's a talking bird essentially.
Right.
And so but there's a lot of like it's the dynamic within the family itself that you're hearing about. It's farming life in Aotearoa that you're hearing about.
I love that someone woke up one day and said, I'm going to write a book from the perspective of a magpie. I love that. That makes me happy about humanity.
Yeah. And her other book, Pet, I really liked as well. Pet. P-E-T.
Emezi also wrote a book called Pet.
Yes. I just thought about that.
Little coincidence there.
Yeah.
So then the other book that I'm currently reading, speaking of Booker Prizes, is the Stoneyard Devotional by Outwood.
Oh.
So
what do you think of it?
In the States. Just came out in the States, we should
say. This is Athena's copy for the viewers that I am borrowing from my beautiful friend Athena. And my cat this morning started like stepping on it. I'm like, this is not my book. You have to be very careful.
Oh, you're fine. Please. Books should be enjoyed. What do you think of it?
I like it. I mean, I think it was, I don't know. We'll get there. I think. And I think it was just getting to a part that I thought was slightly interesting. So I feel like I had a vision in my head that was written in the methodology of a devotional. And so I thought it was going to be more like, for those who know me know that I love playing with style and like hermit crabbing or like different ways of doing things. And so I thought it was really going to be in the form of a devotional.
Yeah.
So in that way, it was a little bit of a letdown.
Sorry.
But the story itself so far so good.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I just started it, so too early to say.
Okay.
All right. Great. So today we are talking about a book. Typically, as you know, this podcast is about like books that are getting recognized or winning awards or whatever that we're not kind of resonating with. And we have this usually 2-to-1 ratio of, so if one of us loved it, it's okay. We'll still talk about it. But this is the opposite. This is one of us did not like this book and the other two loved it.
Not didn't like. Don't say that.
Okay. Well,
just like that.
Didn't resonate with.
Yes.
Okay. Terminology. Yeah. We'll get into the details shortly. But the book we're talking about is On the Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. I want to just put out there that I remember when I bought this book, I was with Athena. We were at the university bookstore. I don't even know why we were there. We probably just either went for a walk and ended up in the bookstore, which, as we often did. This is when
Yeah.
we both worked at Western Washington University, or we were in the bookstore getting stuff for work. And this was on the end cap, and we were both like, "Oh my gosh!" I picked it up and bought it right then. So anyway.
Yeah, they don't do that anymore. They don't have like a big like nice fiction section anymore. By the way, Western, if you're listening, I know maybe it was sales and stuff, but it breaks my heart when I go in there and there's not that section. Anyway,
Well,
continue.
that's okay, but they can go to Village Books.
That's true. That's true.
Or they can find
Yeah.
the link for it in our notes, show notes.
Yeah.
And they can
And support your local bookstore.
bookshop.org. Yeah. That's an option.
Well, that's what Bookshop does. You can pick which bookstore you want to support in that.
Yeah. So what do you two like? Tell me your thoughts on that book.
You want to start, Rebecca?
Yeah, I will start. So I want to just start the whole conversation with, I came to Ocean Vuong from poetry, which is A Night Sky with Exit Wounds. And
mine too.
I
brought mine too.
And this book like broke me. It was like everything. Like I was just looking through it again, and I'm like, I have like notes and underlines and like everything. Like, I mean, like it was just amazing. It was so powerful. And so I think coming into his novel, I already had this in my head. And I think it's one of these wonderful things when poets become novelists, that you get the same attention to language throughout. So I think I read it from a lens of a poet writing me a novel. And yes, I could be. Like it was just like, I just love the way that Ocean brings things to life through a very close attention to language. And even listening to Ocean Vuong talk about books or writing, he's very intentional. And so I love that. But I do have two quotes to kind of give you a hint here, Colleen, of why I liked this book so much.
Yeah,
I have many, but these were two. And it's going to be very evident. So some people say history moves in a spiral.
Oh, here we go.
Not a line we have come to expect. We travel through time in circular trajectory, our distance increasing from the epicenter only to return again one cycle removed. So it's a spiral of time.
That's your catnip.
It is, right? And so to continue on, right, like whether we want to or not, we are traveling in a spiral. We are creating something new from what is gone. And so this is essentially how the story is told, right? Where we move through time. It's a story. It starts off as well. I thought how it started was like, "Dear Ma, I'm writing to reach you." And I think there's this space here where I, even as a writer, use writing as a tool. And I know this is a novel, but as a tool to reach back into time, right? To then bring it into the present. So, I mean, how can I not love a book that talks about the spiral of time?
Right.
We should talk about your book sometime.
Yes.
What's it called, Rebecca?
The Unfurling Frond. And then there's also, I have another one called My Place in the Spiral.
My Place in the Spiral.
Yes. They both talk about spiral.
I love it. What about Colleen? Should we switch over to then come back to me, or what do you think?
I think we should start with All the Love.
Okay.
And this is not the book. I just, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So is it me?
Yeah.
I just love it. But I said, holding up the poetry too. Like, I love Ocean's work. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. And I just love the language that he uses in all of his books. It's amazing. I mean, it's just absolutely gorgeous. And sometimes for me, I will admit to, if it's just so beautifully written, and some of the sentences are like just poetry for me. I just love it. Even if the story is not like I'm like, oh, like I just it's so beautiful. It's like reading a book of poetry. You know what I mean? Like I love his work. I love the book. I thought it was gorgeous. I love that, like you said, how it opens and that letter and the it's just beautiful. It's just so beautiful. It really was moving to me. But Colleen's face. Sorry, I'm
Is
trying.
he from out there? Is he in your region?
No.
Okay, you just both are talking with him like with some kind of ownership. So I thought maybe he was like
Oh,
part
We
of
just
the.
no.
we just love him
What
so
is it?
much. Like he's
I
ours.
know that's great. I don't know. Mm-hmm.
And I have to recommend like any interview with him. Like who had
Yes,
him?
agreed.
I should have had. Oh my God, I should have had it prepped. But if it was like Stephen Colbert or somebody, and it's just oh my goodness, the way he talks about family and oh, just so gorgeous. You know what I mean? But yeah, I love it. I love it. I'm not trying to rush through, but I'm super
What's the
interested to
year
hear.
that came out?
2019.
Yeah, that's the
And I read it that day. Like I picked it up from the bookstore and read it that day. And just FYI, at the time of this, he was currently living in Massachusetts.
okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say somewhere East Coast. I'm
Yeah,
trying to
yeah.
remember.
This is the perfect example of the book is absolutely not at fault, and I was very excited to read it, and I got it from the library, and also I had it from the library. And I've said before, I'm easier to give up on a book if it's from the library.
Yeah.
So, and people I love had read this book, but in 2019, a book about a relationship with a mother was a third rail for me, and
Mhm.
I got through, I don't know, 15 pages, and I was like,
Yep.
I can't read this book. I just can't. I can't read this book. Um,
Yep.
even though it's beautiful, and that's why we're talking about this book, is that like sometimes we just abandon books for our own reasons. And I think I remember abandoning it. Does the mom use like corporal punishment? She does. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure I abandoned the book at a moment where, because it's about
Yeah.
a mom who is different culturally, like has different attitudes about mothering culturally. Am I remembering this right at all? What is the book
Gosh,
about?
help me, Rebecca. Is that
Well, I think so, right? Because I think I'm looking at like probably around where your time you stopped it. So like on page 14, it's like, you're a mother, ma, you're also a monster.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
there is a complicated relationship there. Um, again, I read this in 2019, so there are moments that have stayed with
I
me, but
know.
I don't remember all of it. But it is
No,
about
but it's
the
interesting that I remember pretty much exactly where I was 6 years ago
Yeah,
when I
yeah, I
I
think,
know.
put that book
and
away, because it was on every list, and on paper it is a book that I would love, and maybe if I went back to it I would really like it now. But
Yeah.
I remember like just hearing about this book like kind of makes me viscerally uncomfortable, because
Oh,
I just remember being like, I can't sit with this book right now.
yeah,
And
right,
it's not the book's
right,
fault at all.
right,
But and I don't want to use the word triggering, and I know that's an important word, and it does mean something. It wasn't like that. It was just it was a space that I couldn't sit in. And
yeah,
so
yep,
I think it's important to say out loud that that's going to happen. That happens
right.
sometimes. You read
Oh,
it
yeah,
and it's like a third rail for your own life. And I know there's all kinds of talk about snowflakes and triggering and all that, but like reading elicits emotion, and sometimes sitting with that emotion is not what's safe or good for you. So
right.
it's okay to and I
Absolutely.
love interviews with Ocean Vuong. Like I tell I really like love him. Is that the right pronoun? Um
Yeah, I think so. I
as
believe
a
so.
person and as a human. And I probably would like the poetry, though it looks like it's a picture of him and his mother on the cover, and there's probably some and that novel feels very the novel feels very not novelly. I actually didn't remember it was a novel until you held it up. So it was just not a space for me to be in. And
Yeah,
so I took it back. and that is okay for all of you
Yep.
to do that. And we all probably have books that have done
Yep.
that with us. And I try to be really mindful of that when I'm teaching books. I have
Yeah.
a statement on my syllabus. I don't call it a trigger warning, but I basically say, like, I can't know what you're bringing to these books, and I can't warn you about every single thing, but I think of it as like an allergy. Like, if you
Yeah.
have the first week of class to like tell me the things that would affect you negatively, and then
Yeah.
I'll know to tell you. I
Right.
can't do it. I can't guess, but if you tell me, I will tell you. Um,
Right.
so right. Books make us feel, and so
Yeah.
sometimes
Yeah.
we just don't want to feel the feelings. Um,
Yep.
but I
Yeah, and
want
I think,
Absolutely.
again, just looking at the pages at the beginning, because there's so much that happens throughout the whole novel, but at the beginning is very intense in those spaces. Like,
Yeah.
this one is like, what is a country but a life sentence? And then kind of goes into like a jug of milk bursting on his shoulder, like a knife, like her holding a knife to him, basically meaning,
yes,
get out, right?
that's
Like,
it.
Yeah.
Yep.
and he's like, and I ran until I like forgot that I was 10 or whatever. Like, that's all very intense at the beginning, that we see, because I think towards the middle we get more, and this is where the spiral of time, right? Like, into he's older in his life and what's going on in that, the speaker, right? Like, of the novel, their their story and what's happening there, and and then that kind of coming back is like the spiral essentially. But yeah,
Yep.
it's really intense there at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was just
Yep.
something I couldn't bear.
Yeah.
To be
Yeah.
honest. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is, we were just talking about that in the last podcast of another
Yeah.
brutal book that you read, right? About cannibalism in some way, and right, the
Right.
intensity of that. And yeah, and like, at
Tender as
the end of our conversation that day, I was like, ooh, like, I don't know if I could read that, right? Just
Right.
because of how much we feel when we are in a book and reading it, right? If it's too intense, we've talked about talking about this before, but there's another book, the Lauren Groff book, that there was just too much killing of animals that I was like, I can't take this anymore. I'm sure it's going to
Right.
be a beautiful book, but I just can't.
Yeah.
There was a book
Yep.
that was by an indigenous author. Oh,
Oh,
do you remember that book? Do
yes,
you
because
remember what
I
it's
read one by the same author, but it was a different one. And so you were like, this whole thing, and I was like,
called? And
what?
the hair gets caught in the motorcycle wheel. I was like 50 pages in, and I was like, I'm out.
God.
I can't be here. I can't.
Oof.
The world is hard enough, and I'm sure this book does great work, but
Yikes.
I can't be here. But yet I could read a whole book, this, in the past about human cannibalism. Like that I could sit with.
Yeah.
It all depends where we are. We're different people.
Right.
We come
Right.
to
And
a
that.
book with more than we'll ever know. So I was
Right.
disappointed that I did. I still like feel like that's like an albatross around my neck for me that I've not read that book, because it is so, I know it's gorgeous. And maybe I could
Yeah.
read
But
it now. Maybe I would get a lot out of it. But there's also a million other books to read. So that's the problem. But
I definitely say
not
pick up the
sad.
poetry. Pick up the poetry.
Maybe I'll snag since especially at the start we talked about poetry. But is it all
yeah.
about like cracking the code of his mom? Because like I just am not there. Is that what it's about? Is that what the book?
Well.
I mean, the cover would indicate to me that is the
Yeah.
fertile ground that he is excavating.
It's
For
also about, coming to the United States
his
of
place. Yeah.
America, right? Like what that means.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not all there, but I feel like it might be more accessible for you in the poetry space, as opposed
Yeah.
to like trying to
Yeah.
read a whole novel
But
about
you
that.
read a poem and then you put the book down for 6 months
Right.
and then you read another
Right.
poem. That's the beauty of it. So
Right.
yeah, maybe I'll.
Yeah.
You both loved it so much. Yeah, Athena, go ahead.
I know. I was just gonna say I'd recommend. I had this pulled up, but that if listeners want to, they look up the Paris Review interview with him about it called "Survival as a Creative Force."
Mm,
It's just I mean, any interview he does, it's like, are you real?
that's
But
good.
it's just
No,
gorgeous. But like in one of I had it pulled up here. It says, at one point in the book, he tells his mother, I hate you, but he says it's to see what language can do. What does that mean to experiment on and with our kin? And and he says maybe all of life is an experiment in some sense. Just because we use words like son and mother does not mean that love and forgiveness are a given. They must be tested, and they must be tested with tools. Language is one of those tools. One question this novel hovers over is how do people who hurt each other find ways to protect themselves while attempting to love and ultimately to heal? I
I will
think that
never be able to read that book. I will never.
yeah,
And someday I will write a book why I can't read that book. So,
yep,
I'm not trying to be inscrutable, but in 2019, there was absolutely no way I was reading that book. Just
yep,
hearing that makes me be like, no, thank you.
okay, yep, that's good.
But I
Good to
wrote down,
know.
I'm going to put that in the show notes because I think that sounds like that's a great thing for readers to look at too, is to look at that interview.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it gives you a little like.
I'm not. Please hear me say.
No.
He sounds amazing.
No. That's why I read it, because I think that interview tells you a bit like what you're getting into, And while it's gorgeous, you have to know if it's a space I want to be. And I hear you about the author that wrote Convenience Store Woman. Do you know this Japanese author? Have you read this book? It's fantastic. I loved it. It's just about this woman in Japan that wants space, and I don't want to belittle it. So
I'm
please,
looking up while you're talking.
okay, please excuse me, and author, if you're listening, please. I'm not trying to like make this small, but basically to me, it was about a woman that wants a simple life when people around her don't understand that. And I just loved it. I thought it was gorgeous.
Sayaka
So
Murata.
yes, and the point of that is keep that open because I have to look for something else. The point of my comment there is she wrote another book, the next one, and it takes a real hard turn at the end and goes into this place where I was like, that reminds me of Tender is the Flesh. And I got through it and I could read it. And I was getting at, I guess, is that I think sometimes it's easier to read things that are almost so like you said, dystopian or absurd.
Yes.
That's easier. Like I can almost read about that's why I mention a lot of horror on this podcast because I do love. I think there's a lot of beauty in a lot of different horror novels. But I think sometimes it goes so far out that way that's almost easier for me than to read like something about you know
something that's so close. Yeah. And sometimes it's good and cathartic. And was the other book called Earthlings?
Yes. And some people were like, how did you read that ending? I'm like, well, because to me it was like so far beyond like
this has got to be what Athena's talking about.
But Convenience Store Woman is gorgeous, and I'd love to talk about that on a future podcast.
Ocean Vuong written another book since then?
Mm-hmm. It's coming out soon.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I have it on pre-order.
Okay. So this is like that's the latest book was that one, and now this 6 years later another book is coming out is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
There's nothing in between those six short stories or something probably.
I don't think so. I'm trying to.
And I think so. I started this when we were talking about why I like the book, and I feel like again my walking into it with the poetry first in my head. Because Athena, you mentioned this too. Like sometimes even if the writing's beautiful, you can kind of get past some of the really hard stuff. And I think that was probably what helped me even get through some of those like hard scenes at the beginning was really thinking of it as a poet writing a novel and like the ways that he chose to share that part of the story was what I was really paying attention to. And this comes back to a podcast we had previously about audiobooks. I don't know, this could have been a very intense one to listen to as an audiobook, but because I was paying attention to word choice, lines, like you would in reading poetry, I probably had a different reading experience with it. And so that's why, when we started this and I asked you, Colleen, had you read his poetry before? Because I think that, I don't know, I could be totally wrong in that too, but to your point,
there's something about that priming the pump, right? It primed the pump. Like I came in hot and, like I came in hot, like not knowing what was there. And you knew. And so there's probably a lot to be said about that. I think I've even taught some of his poetry. Like I'm trying to think now, but because it's anthologized, it's, this is writing that's already being anthologized. So yeah, I'm excited that his new book is coming out. Do we know do we know anything about it?
I don't. Do you, Rekha?
We've talked about this before in the podcast about, I think it was our Barbara Kingsolver episode, where I was just like, I just pre-ordered, like new book pre-order.
Funny you say that because Chimamanda Adichie's new book comes out this week, and
that's also pre-ordered.
At which I pre-ordered like 6 months ago, and I was like, oh, that's going to come this week. Well, that's going to take up some time. I need to plan around that. So
yeah, I think I pre-ordered them at the same time.
Okay.
They must have been on a list of like what's coming out, and I was just like, boom, pre-order both of those.
Yeah.
So the poetry book, Night Sky with Exit Wounds, came out in 2016, just for reference there.
So the new book is coming out in May, and it's called The Emperor of Gladness. Just for everybody's information.
Yay. Yep.
So yeah, well, this is right. There. Nobody disliked the book. I just disliked the experience of reading and stopped.
Yes, and I think that we've talked about that a lot. Sometimes just where you are in life and your headspace, or just again things make you stop. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the book. It's just where we are.
It's bringing human stuff to human created texts, which is why we love reading. And we love books. We love talking about them, but sometimes it's just like, you don't have to push through something if it feels like too much that day.
Well, I think there's something there too, right? That if there's so much when and I'm going to even say Lauren Groff's book too, so we're not just talking about Ocean Vuong here, when there's so intense in the writing that you actually are feeling it, that you're like, I can't. I mean, that's a testament to the writer that you can't breeze through it. It's like you are feeling it, and it's not a feeling you can sit in right now.
It's the reason I've read pretty much everything Mary Oliver has ever written, but I have never read her book called Dog Poems. I'm like, never. I probably will never read I have it. I'm like, I don't think I'll ever be able to read that book because of that. Like, I think there's just things we have. So it's okay to have those things. We're humans.
Yeah. So always on the podcast, we give you a recommendation of a book that we all loved and thought you might like as well. And I'm going to start this one with that none of us have a copy. And I believe that is because we've all shared it with somebody and either never got it back or told them to pass it on. So that's a testament there that we don't have a copy to share on the screen for those who are watching. But the book we are talking,
very similar coloration of this book.
It
does.
So if you find the book that has very similar colors to this, that's the best we can do right now.
There you go. I like it.
So the book we're talking about is The Change by Kirsten Miller. Yes. So Colleen, you're doing Jazz Happy Hands. So do you want to go first about why you're recommending this book?
I don't take credit very often for things, but I feel like I was the one that brought the change to like every reader I know. I'm sure I read about it somewhere in kind of like my feminist book Instagram worlds, but I read it and I was like, everybody needs to read this book. So it's about three women who the change is an allusion to menopause, but that they all come together and they have powers and they bring down some kind of very specific, pretty much taking from current events, structural violence being done to women. And the characters are great. It's just a good book. I just think it's a good book. And I mean, not clearly maybe, but like this is a time in my life where I am very interested in investigating the power that comes through menopause and the crone and how people think about women at this time in their lives. But also it's just a really good book. Like you don't have to be in that point of your life. In fact, I got it from the library and then did buy it. It's one of those books and then it's gotten circulated and it's never gotten back to me, which is okay. I don't know that I need it on my shelf. It's not probably a book I'm going to pick up and look at. But I just think it's it's a delicious book, but it does really good work. And there's these 3 women characters that are so interesting. And then I read it as like a little book club. Like it's a great book club book. If you're listening and you're part of one and need a book to recommend, as long as people have a little bit of an edge. I don't think, maybe not for everybody, but I just think it's a great read. And while you're talking, I'm going to look up, because then I feel like maybe I read another thing by her. So I want to look.
Lulu Dean, the Lulu Dean's library.
Oh yeah. I have that literally sitting like right here, but I didn't read it yet. But so
I have I have it, but haven't read
Athena,
that
what did we tell us why you like The Change?
Oh, it was great. It was just the characters were awesome. And it was just so fun seeing what they came up with I'm trying not to give stuff away, but to accomplish some of the things they had to do. It was very creative and I loved it. I also love anything kind of, I'm trying not to say, I don't want to give too much away, but like
witchy, you like?
Yeah, I was just gonna say witchy. You know what I mean? Like it was great. There's scenes in it that stay in my mind. You know what I mean? Like that I can see the visual when I was reading it of some of the things that they did. It's just great. I love it. That book just makes me smile. It's empowering. I love that book. Yeah, I was like, yeah.
What can you say about The Change?
I'd say the same thing. Good character development, and I have the same where images or moments of that have stayed with me. I mean, I can't even remember when this came out when we read it, but it was a while ago. It wasn't recent.
Probably 3 summers. It's probably
yeah. And so the fact that some of that's still in my head, right?
Yep.
Like the ending.
I was going to say the ending. That's exactly the one.
Ending and the character, and I won't remember her name at the moment, but the one that like kind of like has the overgrown house and the
original the original coven lady. Yeah.
That's the best.
And the kind of attitudes from the neighborhood in that space and her as a character, like that sits with me all the time. Like all the time. So yeah, I definitely think it is in that crone era, but it's actually way bigger than that. I think anyone could get a lot from the book itself. But yeah, I just think the character development was really good.
That actually ended up, this is why I'm looking it up, it ended up being a Good Morning America book club book.
Yeah.
After I had read it and passed, and it does have a different cover when at that point. It's a little more feminist, empowering cover, playing up what it's about. So that's curious too, because the original cover it's more gardeny. You wouldn't really quite know what it's about. And then the cover with the Good Morning America seal is like a woman like holding a flower, and it's red, and it's kind of like Medusa-y vibe.
So, wow.
Interesting.
Okay.
Well, and if you've heard about the BBC TV show called The Change, also based on, I believe, a novel, maybe not the same one. So just putting that out there, they're not the same.
I think that there's a lot of, I know I've read other books, and I'm not thinking of a single one right now that has used the idea of like the time of menopause as the space for investigating and empowering. Right. There's a lot of, I feel like that's having a moment. I can't think of a single one, but I know
Venko does that. Did you read that one, Athena? Venko?
I think I did.
But, if you're like, oh, that sounds like a book I've read, it might not be this book. I think menopause is having a minute. And this is, this to me, I think was the first book I read that was situated and used that as a vehicle to get through the narrative. It's not like a big part of the book. Like, it's called The Change, but like there's more changes that happen, but it uses the idea of the change for that. Yeah. It's a delight. I would love to know what people think of it if they read it, or if they have read it in the notes, in the comments. Give us a comment if you've read The Change or any other kind of good witchy menopause books that we should look at.
And for our friends that still have our version of The Change, please pass it on to someone else.
Yeah. I'm not going to reread it.
But pass it on. Keep it going.
Yeah, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh crap, that's probably Colleen's copy, fine. I don't care. I'm sure when I gave it to you, I said I don't want it back. I'm very clear about this. Honestly, I don't give books I want back anymore. I've learned that lesson the hard
Right.
way.
Right.
It's okay.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what
All
we
right.
have.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us. Again, we will be putting in the links to all the books we've mentioned in the show notes. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Happy reading. Bye.
Bye.